Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are jumping right into a highly practical masterclass designed to decode the dense psychological mechanics of why we work. You know, as managers, leaders, or just deeply curious professionals, we often look at high-performing teams and wonder if it's some kind of magic. Well, it's not. It is psychology, it is structure, and it's entirely by design. So today, we're going to completely break down the exact blueprint of workplace motivation. Right off the bat, I want you to think about this. What actually gets you out of bed and into work? It sounds like a simple, maybe even a rhetorical question, but honestly, a manager's true leadership competence relies entirely on their ability to diagnose what drives their team. Because if you can't answer this exact question for the people working under you, you really can't influence them, direct them, or truly unlock their potential. So, to understand how to diagnose that drive, we first need to define what it is we're looking at. Researchers like Lawwell, along with Zedek and Blood, describe motivation as a predisposition to act in a goal-directed way. Basically, it's the inner state that energizes, activates, and directs our behavior. Think of motivation not just as an emotion, but as the literal engine of effort. If you want the car to move, you've absolutely got to understand how the engine is built. Okay, let's quickly run through the agenda for this explainer. We'll be using a 6-part blueprint. We are going to decode workplace motivation, explore the needs that drive us, look at manager mindsets and job hygiene, break down the mechanics of motivation, uncover the power of reinforcement, and then wrap up with some highly practical tools for managers. Let's start right off with Section 1, decoding workplace motivation and looking at the core equation. You see, employee performance isn't a mystery. It's a tangible product of specific, calculable elements. Take Mayer and Lawler's 1973 research, for example. They laid out this formula where performance is a function of ability multiplied by motivation. And motivation itself, that's desire, multiplied by commitment. Now, what is truly fascinating here is the absolute unyielding logic of a multiplicative formula. If your employee has an ability level of 100, but their motivation, their desire, and commitment is at 0, well, 100 times 0 is 0. Their performance is going to be 0. All the training and resources in the world literally cannot compensate for a broken motivation engine. So how exactly do we fix a broken engine? Well, researchers Rudolph and Kleiner point out that we essentially have 2 types of fuel: extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. Extrinsic motivation involves those tangible rewards. We're talking salary, fringe benefits, job security. The catch? These are often set by company policy and sit largely outside an individual manager's control. Intrinsic motivation, on the other hand, is all about psychological rewards. It's a sense of challenge, achievement, appreciation, and positive recognition. This is the fuel that is directly driven by a manager's everyday actions. You've got to learn to leverage intrinsic rewards, because for sure, that is where your true power lies. Which brings us nicely to Section 2, the needs that drive us, often referred to in the research as content theories. This section is all about the internal pressures individuals are constantly striving to fulfill. Now, you're likely familiar with Abraham Maslow's famous 1943 hierarchy of needs, stepping all the way up from physiological needs to self-actualization. But let's look at how this builds into something even more practical for the everyday workplace. Back in 1972, Alderfer actually condensed Maslow's 5 rigid levels into 3 core categories, known as the ERG theory: existence, relatedness, and growth. Existence covers our basic material survival. Relatedness addresses our social relationships with colleagues and friends. And growth is what impels our creativity, innovation, and self-esteem. Now, unlike Maslow, who viewed these needs as a strict bottom-to-top ladder, Alderfer recognized the messy complexity of human beings. He noted that multiple needs can be active at exactly the same time. And even more importantly, he introduced this fascinating concept of frustration regression. Basically, this means if an employee is continually frustrated in their attempts to satisfy a higher-level growth need, let's say they just keep getting passed over for creative projects, they will regress. Suddenly, they become hyper-focused on lower-level needs, like demanding a bigger paycheck or complaining about office conditions. Now let's explore Section 3, manager mindsets and job hygiene. A manager's perception of their workforce entirely shapes the working environment, and we've got 2 brilliant academic frameworks that prove this. First up is Douglas McGregor's incredibly famous Theory X and Theory Y. These are 2 completely opposite sets of assumptions a manager might hold. A Theory X manager believes the average human inherently dislikes work, lacks ambition, and basically must be coerced or threatens to get anything done. But a theory Y manager? They believe work is as natural as play, that people actually seek out responsibility, and that creativity is widely distributed. McGregor warned that when management creates an oppressive Theory X environment, it absolutely stifles natural enthusiasm. You literally crush your employees' intrinsic drive, and you turn potentially highly productive creative workers into apathetic clock watchers. And speaking of the working environment, we have to talk about Frederick Hertzberg's 1959 study of 200 accountants and engineers. He discovered something truly astonishing about what he called hygiene factors. These are things like salary, company policy, job security, and working conditions. What's wild is that these hygiene factors do not actually motivate people. Hertzberg found that they merely prevent dissatisfaction. Fixing a bad salary or poor working conditions doesn't magically create a positive attitude. It merely brings motivation back up to a neutral 0 level. It stops people from being angry, sure, but it doesn't make them inspired. So the crucial takeaway here is this. True intrinsic motivation only comes from the motivators related to the job content itself. According to Hertzberg, if you want to push your team's motivation past 0 and into the positive, you absolutely must provide achievement, recognition, responsibility, and opportunities for personal advancement. The work itself has to matter.
Let's transition into Section 4, the mechanics of motivation, specifically looking at process theories.
We're moving from internal needs to the logical gears of the mind, examining how employees rationally calculate their expected outcomes before putting in any effort. Take the number plus 0.9. This perfectly illustrates Victor Vroom's 1964 expectancy theory in action, which states that motivation equals valence multiplied by expectancy. Let me give you a quick story to show how this works. Imagine an employee named Kofi. Kofi strongly desires a university sponsorship from his company. His preference, his valence, is a maximum +1. He also firmly believes that if he works really hard, the company will actually give him the sponsorship. His expectancy is high. Let's call it a 0.9. Multiply those together, and Kofi's motivation is a powerful +0.9. But his colleague Ernest, he couldn't care less about going back to university. Ernest's valence is 0. Even if Ernest knows hard work would get him the sponsorship, his motivation mathematically calculates at a flat 0. This proves exactly why identical incentives completely fail to motivate different employees. You simply have to know what your people actually value. And remember, they aren't just calculating their own rewards, they're calculating yours too. Adams' 1957 equity theory illustrates that an employee's motivation depends heavily on fairness. Employees are constantly comparing their effort-to-reward ratio against colleagues performing similar jobs. If an employee perceives they are working just as hard as a peer but receiving a smaller slice of the pie, whether that's salary, praise, or promotions, their drive plummets. They feel this intense inequity, and they will physically resolve that psychological tension by simply working less hard. It's human nature. That brings us to Section 5, the power of reinforcement, and how we go about shaping behavior. Moving past all those internal calculations, how does the external environment actively shape daily behavior? Well, B.F. Skinner's 1984 concept hinges on one basic truth. Behavior with positive consequences tends to be repeated. You must design the proper environment, actively praise good performance, and provide regular feedback. But notice that third rule, which often really surprises traditional managers. Never punish poor performance. Skinner's research indicated that while positive reinforcement builds productive habits, actively punishing poor performance actually yields negative overall results in the workplace. It just breeds fear, resentment, and avoidance, rather than genuine lasting improvement. Let's head right into our final section, practical tools for managers, building out your everyday toolbox. We're going to convert all these academic frameworks into actionable tactics you can deploy tomorrow morning. Here is your practical toolbox. Step 1. Financial rewards. Charles Handy noted back in 1985 that money is vital because it reflects status and satisfies basic needs, but it must be visibly tied to performance to actually motivate. Step 2. Employee participation. Inviting your team to take part in decisions that affect them directly satisfies those higher-order alder for growth and achievement needs. Step 3. Favorable work conditions. This manages Hertzberg's hygiene factors so your people don't regress. Step 4. Enhanced social relationships. You must design an environment that promotes interpersonal connection. And finally, Step 5. Personal development. Give them a clear path to advance through training and promotion, totally fulfilling their highest intrinsic desires. Which leaves us with this final, truly vital question to reflect on. As you look at your own team today, ask yourself, Are you engineering an environment where your team is intrinsically inspired to grow? Or are you just managing their hygiene? True leadership isn't just about keeping people from being unhappy. It's about purposefully designing an engine where their desire and commitment can thrive. Take these blueprints, apply them to your workplace, and watch the performance follow. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I challenge you to start diagnosing your team's drive today.